Welcome to our second panel of the 2025 Dawnland Festival of Arts and Ideas. As with all previous performances, we do ask that you silence your cell phones, please, and that we also keep the aisles and actually the back of the sort of audience clear. I also want to note that this panel discussion will be recorded and posted on the Abbe website for future viewing. Without further ado, I do want to introduce our panelists, Tyler Everett, Chuck Loring, and Richard Silliboy, to the stage, and I will let each of you take a moment to introduce yourselves.
Okay. Is this thing on? My name is Richard Silliboy. I reside in Littleton, Maine. I live on tribal land. I am an elder of the Mi'kmaq Nation, and I am a master basket maker, so they say.
Gwe, Wabanaki, Weeg, Mi'kmaq, Talawisi, Tyler Everett. Hello, I'm a person of Dawn. I'm Mi'kmaq, and my name is Tyler Everett. I'm a forester for the Passamaquoddy tribe, but I'm a citizen of Mi'kmaq Nation. Yeah.
I am Chuck Loring. I'm Natural Resources Director for the Penobscot Nation. I'm also a citizen of the Penobscot Nation, and previously I was a forester, forest manager, still a licensed forester, but now I run the entire department, wildlife, fisheries, etc. So we'll be talking mostly about forestry, but I'll probably go to wildlife and some fishery stuff as well. But
So I'm going to moderate today's panel discussion, and I'm really honored to do that. I really care about these forests, but I've learned a lot from both of these two here on the stage, both being kind of mentors, leaders in forestry, and especially around brown ash and emerald ash borer with Richard. So I'm really excited. The idea of this panel is to kind of think about Wabanaki homelands and the forests that make up this land and the future of it. What's going on, what's changing, and where are things headed? And so with that, I'm going to go to our first question. And so Chuck, Richard, whoever wants to jump in. When you think about the future of Wabanaki forests, what do you see as the biggest threats to their health and integrity today?
I guess what I see as the biggest threat to our forests today is number one would be climate change, because the climate change, that is, the temperature is moving higher and moving north, and also it's the invasive species that we have coming into the state of Maine. And as the temperature rises coming north, that'll bring additional insects and invasive species that could never survive in our environment, in our temperature control. With the climate change, the insects and the invasive species will be coming north and further. And one of the things that, as a basket maker, the emerald ash borer is a threat, not only to the brown ash tree, but it's also a threat to our culture.
Thank you, Richard. Chuck, do you have any ideas there with the biggest threats to Wabanaki forests?
yeah, I mean, Richard hit, I think, the biggest one that we're all concerned the most with. Aside from emerald ash borer, we have Hemlock, woolly Adelgid that are, kind of encroaching on the area. Well, definitely down here, but not so much up our way yet. I'm trying to think of what else there was there. Beech leaf and beech bark disease also is another, we're really concerned, just about having that hard mast around for the animals. That's a really big concern for us. And I was trying to think of what else, but Richard pretty much covered what I thought.
Yeah, no, it seems like there's new threats, novel forest insects, disease, pests, pathogens, always on the rise. There's always new threats. It can be really challenging as a land manager or an artisan that has deep connections to these lands, to see these new threats come in and really put at large something that we have such a profound connection to. One of the big threats that I think about that kind of a double-edged sword is development. Development being a double-edged sword by a lot of, like, I went on a great fishing trip a couple weeks ago, and the only way that I was able to get there was on logging roads. And it gives us access, gives us a connection to the land in a very easy and accessible way. But the double-edged sword is, right now those are large tracts of land that people own. And as development comes in, those large tracts get divvied up into smaller and smaller fragmented ownerships. And then access really becomes a big challenge. And not only access, but as land stewards or foresters, working with one neighbor can be challenging. Working with 50, 60, 75, 100 landowners that are adjacent to the land that you're trying to manage can really make it hard to think landscape level on trying to protect from things like invasive forest pests, climate change, and all these other things that are putting, a challenge against the forest that we love and enjoy today. So another question I want to touch on is land return. We see that as a really common theme lately that is really powerful. It comes with its challenges. It comes with its perks and its benefits as well to our people. But how do you see the return of tribal lands or the expansion of tribal stewardship changing the way forests are cared for and understood?
Rich is going to give me a chance now. I would say I think there's more thought given to species that aren't recognized as commercial forest products. As if tribal members and tribal entities are able to kind of steward land. I think we also kind of employ a longer term thinking and what that looks like versus I have my own land, and that's kind of like I think about it as, I'm passing that down to my daughter and, maybe her family later on at some point, right? But when we're thinking as a tribe, we're thinking out further and further into those generations, and I think that's just a really big thing to be able to kind of continue for 10,000 more years. It's really important to us, and then trying to pass on. Kind of using that land base to be able to pass on knowledge, teach responsible harvesting, depending on, whether it's non-commercial, forest product for basket making or if it's for, harvesting moose, et cetera,
Thanks, Chuck. Richard, what do you think about land return? What does that mean to you? Is it something that's got its challenges, something that stands out to you about land return? And
the land bank and working with land trust across the state, we've had a lot of additional information to the tribes in the last 15 years probably, and we've also made additional friendships with Peter Forbes, and he works with a lot of different land trusts, and we're slowly getting some land back. The tribes up in Aroostook County, not so much, simply because we're dealing with Irving, lumber company, and they don't separate or sell anything. Carlisle and Prentice, I don't think they're selling anything at all. Certainly not giving anything away the way some of the land trust is doing. Irvin, the only way he'll sell anything is if he wants to sell 5,000 acres, he wants to purchase 5,000 acres. So he wants to maintain the same amount of land, but once he's clear cut a certain area, then he's willing to part with that. only if he can buy additional land at another place that has not been harvested. So it's a challenge both ways, but slowly but surely we're gaining ground on land back. It's great.
Yeah, absolutely. I think land return has its challenges, but at the essence of it, these are our homelands, and it offers the opportunity for artisans, our communities to return to the land and start to rebuild relationships that have been walled off by oftentimes private land that you don't have access to. And one of the things I think about when land does get returned is that we can take our approaches that we use on tribal land today, where we oftentimes look at management through a cultural lens, and we think about these cultural lifeways like hunting and basketry to drive what our management is to help foster good relationships between our community and the land. And I think that's a great kind of transition into the next question is, if we can offer opportunities to show how that cultural lens and the traditional knowledge of our people can really help to build good relationships to the land. It can be a really positive thing for how others manage their land outside of tribal boundaries. So Wabanaki people have had relationships with these forests since time immemorial. How do these relationships shape decisions made about forest management today? Whether you're a tribal forest manager and you're trying to look to your community to guide how you manage the land, what are some of the ways that comes together?
Now, there's many ways that the tribe choose to manage the forest, including burning the forest, burning the small trees and, just clearing it up so we have nothing there but the larger trees. And there's this been going back for thousands of years that, they tested soil down in Massachusetts, I think it was, where they would find a layer of ashes, so many inches down. And then you go another 10 years or something like that, and there'd be another layer of ashes. So up in our area, we never did anything like that because we never had access. The only access to the forest that we had was that the farmers would allow us to go in and cut brown ash as basket making. And we used to think that there was out of the generous of their heart, but get right down to it, the Aroostook County used to grow 240,000 acres of potatoes, and they had to harvest those potatoes in 6 weeks, and they needed a lot of pickers, approximately 19,000 people to harvest that. And every one of those potato pickers had to have a basket. So we was allowed to go in and cut ash anywhere we wanted to. And but after when my friend Mike Carpenter became Attorney General, I asked him to, do some research on that. And he said, there is nothing on the books. So it wasn't our benefit that we was getting that brown ash. It was to their benefit that we would get the wood and make the baskets so they could harvest all those potatoes. And they certainly wouldn't have been able to do that without the baskets that they had and without the 19,000 basket makers, which probably, 15,000 of those people were the 4 tribes from the Wabanaki people. The farmers used to go as far as Nova Scotia and from Maine, northern Maine, and they would put sides on their truck and a canvas over it, and they would go as far as Nova Scotia or Quebec and get a load of potato pickers. And if that farmer only wanted 15 pickers and 30 people wanted to get on that truck, he knew that somebody in that area will want additional pickers, so they would bring them over. So it's been a challenge both ways.
Thank you, Richard. It's Chuck, when you think about the relationships of the community to the forest, a lot of the traditional knowledge in your community, back when you were with Forestry and now as the natural resource director, how does that uh, connection to the land change how you approach your job?
I would say, we try to incorporate information from, our elders and our artists in the tribe. Um, they know where all the good materials are that they gather. They're not always very forthcoming with, where to find that type of stuff, but they are helpful in kind of framing around what we should be looking for. Um, they like us to let them know, like, if we do come across like a good basket, or ash or a great looking birch tree that they could check out later on for to harvest some birch bark. But so, trying to get kind of informed on that and frame that around when we're writing our forest management plan, that um, that's kind of combining Western science with their traditional knowledge. And I guess, like right now we're trying to figure out how to best do this, but I think what we're going to end up doing is having a committee of artists and other folks that will kind of come in and hopefully help guide us, with some different ideas on some research, like on you know birch bark in particular. It's one that I'm really thinking a lot about, and trying to figure out how far we should kind of buffer those good trees, um, and just kind of help preserve that, and also try to help propagate it into the future. Talked about also maybe incorporating some burning into that practice as well. And I would also say, I think that it's going to protect them from abcormic branching, logging damage, storm damage as well. And nowadays, we have a lot of that stuff going on with the storms, and birch is kind of highly susceptible to that type of damage as well from ice storms. So I think buffering will be helpful in that. But and I think ultimately chief and council kind of decides what our they vote on our management plan and approve it, but working with input from the citizens and the Department of Natural Resources kind of helps frame how we get there. But
Yeah, thank you, Chuck. I listening to both of you talking about traditional knowledge holders in your community that help shape management or stewardship. I think that it just gets to how much knowledge they have. You got to think like the basket makers, the people who are in these forests one season to the next season to the next season, and the knowledge that they have has been passed down from generation to generation. If there's going to be a change in these settings in these forests, they're the people that are going to pick up on it because they know these spaces at a whole nother level. And I think that just kind of hits to the point of why it's so important in our roles to oftentimes lean on the community to provide some insight into what we should be doing in the forest. So another thing I wanted to touch base on has already kind of been touched on by a lot of your comments, Richard. Emerald ash borer, we know this non-indigenous insect that's come from Southeast Asia to North America, Turtle Island, and it's been wiping out our ash trees. In particular, the black or brown ash tree, the basket tree, really being hit really hard by this insect. What are some of the things that Mi'kmaq Nation is doing to respond to emerald ash borer on tribal brown ash forests?
The only thing we can do with the emerald ash borer is just try to control it, try to slow it down. The emerald ash borer come into the United States through the pellets that were brought in. The material would come in on the ships, and it come into Michigan probably in the mid-90s, and really didn't know anything about the emerald ash borer or what was killing the ash out there until about 2002 or a little before that. But we went out there in 2002 and did a study on what it looked like, and just see a whole grove of brown ash and all dead tops. And the tribe out there that was making baskets from it. They submerged a bunch of trees and kept them down there for 6 weeks, I think it was, underwater. And when they brought those up, we were there at the time when they brought them up, and we peeled some of those trees, and the larvae that's under that bark was just as live as when they first submerged those logs. So, and it's been moving east and west ever since. And I recently heard that it's down in South Carolina, and it's slowly come through and come into the state of Maine, in the southern part of Maine, but it also come across Quebec and come into northern Maine from Quebec. So it's we quarantine, the area, so we can't move wood from point A to point B to transport that insect. But a lot of people would travel with firewood, and we put a stop to it in the southern part of Maine, that you couldn't bring your own firewood, into the state. You had to, wherever you was camping, you had to get local wood. But it's just no stopping it. And we slowed it down quite a bit in northern Maine, but it's slowly coming south. They just moved the quarantine area here a couple of years ago, and it's probably 40 miles north of me now. And that's just about where I go to get my basket wood. So there ain't no stopping it, I said, and hopefully, we'll be able to replant the brown ash tree and have that tree become so it can survive with the emerald ash borer around it. Now, when we was out in Michigan, we cut into trees at 2 inches across, and there was a lot of larvae was in that also. So anyways, I have no idea what we're going to do or how we're going to do it.
It's certainly a big problem, something we're all trying to address in tribal forestry to try and slow the spread and protect those trees. Chuck, what's Penobscot Nation doing to try and respond to emerald ash borer?
So recently we did some mapping that was conducted by the Wabanaki Youth and Science Program. They went out, tried to identify some good brown ash stands. Also tried to identify like some grandmother trees that we should be protecting. The idea is that we're going to hopefully maybe inoculate those if it comes time, which it's getting closer and closer. So it's probably going to be getting about that time. But, years ago we collected seeds kind of, proactively to try to preserve a seed bank so that we could have, some seeds left to plant. And we learned a really valuable lesson there, not to put all your eggs in one basket. They were sent to a seed repository, and I could not track those seeds down. The previous forest manager had sent them out. He told me about it. We'd both been trying to contact them for several years before he retired. I continued for 2 years after he retired, and finally got an answer that they just didn't have them. So that was really disheartening. That was one of the valuable lessons, was not putting all your eggs in that one basket. I feel like the other valuable lesson was nobody cares as much as we do about it. So we need to figure out how we can collectively kind of come together and preserve that species for our futures. And I think there was another point here. I'm trying to think of what the other aspect was. Oh, planning. That's right. We did we tried some planning. We've learned since, like, ash definitely grows better in areas where we probably shouldn't be anyways. Like, as far as timber harvesting, as far as, trying to, we could propagate them in those areas for sure, but definitely not a place you want to be cutting trees anyway. So, or not with equipment at least. But so I think, hopefully we'll get to a point now where we can kind of start trying to figure out how to, get into those areas, do some other planting now that we know kind of where they grow a little bit better. So.
Yeah, no, it's like you said, we're some of the people that really care about it. I think that there's a growing attention around ash as emerald ash borers come into the state, and Richard, other people really being vocal to share how culturally significant this tree is. I think that we're at a moment where there's a lot of attention being placed on this issue of emerald ash borer, where we can really start to take some action, not just on tribal land, but on beyond that, with many partners. When I think about the work that tribal nations are doing to respond to emerald ash borer, by leaps and bounds in terms of seed collection, tribal nations are really leading the effort there. Getting out and scouting these forests to see when seed's going to be produced. And if you're learning how to collect seed, oftentimes that's a tribal program that's sharing that knowledge. Les Benedict is a really great partner of everybody here on the panel in terms of ash seed collection, and we've worked really closely with him. He's with the St. Regis Mohawk tribe. And I know that it's a really kind of hard issue to talk about a lot of times because of what a profound connection basket makers in particular have to this tree and what it means for our culture. But sometimes those hard conversations need to be had so that we can come together and work on protecting such an important tree. We touched on it again a little bit before emerald ash borer, but another threat that's coming to our forests, it's not on tribal land, is Hemlock woolly Adelgid. And not so much on what you're doing, but what does the loss of hemlock in our forests potentially mean to some of the values that Wabanaki people have to those forests?
I mean, hemlock's a great shade tree, I feel like. So there's a lot of value with hemlock along streams and riparian buffers to be able to kind of keep the waters cooler, especially in the headwaters where the tribe owns, most of their lands. Aside from that, hemlock is also important for deer wintering habitat, keeping the snow loads off the ground. So, there's really heavy value in that in of itself. Hemlock are not managed by industrial forestry as a really productive commercial species. So, I think that's kind of worried about that with some of the more industrial companies, going in and targeting, that species for removal and prioritizing other trees that aren't quite as valuable to the wildlife. So, that's a tough one for sure. But yeah, this Forest Futures is really. Tyler and I have been talking about this for like a week in different aspects for the last. Well, I mean, a lot longer than that. But so first of all, we've had a hard time wrapping our heads around the different aspects that we've been thinking about. I feel like, and it's also a really, it's not the happiest thing I talk about for sure, I guess.
Yeah, no, there's a lot that's at large, and hemlock is definitely one that I think it's very easy to throw the towel in on and say hemlock woolly Adelgid is going to wipe out these forests, and there's not a lot of commercial value. So how does that impact me? But I think we know that these forests are so valuable. When we think about brook trout habitat, deer wintering areas. I mean, you talk to any tribal family, and there's a hunter within that family that relies on that harvest each year, put food in the freezer. Some of the greatest or most fond memories in those families is often related to hunting. And so we see from a tribal forestry perspective the value of protecting those forests and doing what we can to be there for that tree. Richard, do you have any thoughts on hemlock and hemlock woolly Adelgid?
Yeah, hemlock is an important species because of the strength of the hemlock. A lot of construction, hemlock is used in a lot of construction, especially these roads that they're building through the forest. And, these little bridges that they have to put in, a lot of that is hemlock, because of the strength of the tree. And so, but as far as us having anything to do with hemlock, we never really had a lot to do with that. But the hemlock is dying because another invasive species that's attacking that. So anyway, John, that's
Yeah. No, there seems to be another invasive species attacking another tree so important to our forest every year that kind of comes back onto the radar. We talked a little bit about climate change and the impacts to our forests. What are some of the ways that Wabanaki nations are leading on forest protection and climate adaptation? I can talk a little bit just more about emerald ash borer and the work that we do with ash. I think it really speaks volumes to how a lot of people overlooked the value of brown ash in particular, but because of the profound cultural significance to Wabanaki people and basketry in particular, tribal nations have really stepped up to make sure that has been a big part of the conversation. When it came on the radar for the state of Maine to think about emerald ash borer, it was well in advance, and it wasn't because of Maine Forest Service staff seeing that there was an issue with ash trees and emerald ash borer. It was actually the basket makers here in the Dawnland talking to Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe basket makers in the Lake States and in New York, starting those conversations well in advance to kind of give a real spotlight as to how important these forests were and this forest tree was, to kind of bring things like a firewood ban, to try and minimize the potential introduction of emerald ash borer in Maine, and working with basket makers to figure out where these forests are so that we can try and protect them. So that's one way that Wabanaki nations are leading in terms of this forest protection and climate adaptation, is that a lot of these species that in a lot of other cases people would throw the towel in on, there's an obvious importance, an obvious cultural value to those forests that our communities step up and make sure that there's a voice being shared.
Yeah, I would say, Wabanaki people kind of recognize the relationship amongst the forest and water a little bit more, I think, than most people. Also, that being said, we focus a lot on the connectivity of forest and the connectivity of watershed, just to be able to, one, return our relatives back to their, the headwater streams where they were able to spawn and proliferate for, thousands of years. But also just in general, I mean, it's the right thing to do. It's creating kind of, these wildlife corridors where things can move throughout this developed landscape, and I mean, we all recognize development is important. I mean, but it needs to be done responsibly. And, I think we're all trying to kind of form our mind around what that looks like. But
Thank you, gentlemen. We are at the 5-minute mark before Q&A. So I'd like to ask the volunteers to come forward and collect the questions, please. And we have about 5 more minutes.
that went fast.
It did go fast. Must have been having fun. I think a good kind of question to wrap up on is for those in the audience who are tribal, non-tribal, what are things that they can do to support the future of Wabanaki forests?
I would say, working with either Wabanaki individual tribes or, collective groups, just to allow access and maybe help, kind of map and protect some of these relatives that we've talked about today, like the brown ash and good specimens of birch, and just kind of educate yourselves more on tree pest and disease. It's one of those things, like Tyler said, every year it seems like there's something else on our radar, and it's really tough even for us to keep up with it. So I can imagine how how tough it is for everybody else. But at the same time, I mean, the more we know, the better informed we are, and I think it's just important that we all kind of, if you're interested in that type of thing, to be able to kind of, keep up with it a little bit better, and it helps us all work together. And then also the general characteristics of what good specimens are for some of these tree species. If you if you have interest in kind of helping the Wabanaki tribes and individual artists kind of preserve, their heritage here, that's an important step. But.
Yeah, I'd like to say that the forest, there is just so much medicine that we use that's out there in the forest, walking through. And when I was young, my mother and I would strike off and just walk through the woods, and she would collect medicines here. We'd go a little further, collect medicines there, and I was saying, I don't need to learn this at this time. I can learn that anytime. So I really didn't pay much attention, to what she was selecting and what it was for. So I kick myself in the butt today for not paying attention, because there's a lot of information out there, but it's written, on Micmac medicines. There's a nice book on that. So anyways, it's difficult. The other thing that I wanted to speak on before we get done is PFAS. PFAS is a multi-chemical, that combine together and in the atmosphere and come into the soil and the waters. Just recently there was an announcement that they read off probably 8 different lakes in the area, and they said not to eat any fish out of that. But we knew that before, a couple of years ago. We've been studying PFAS by growing hemp, and would harvest the hemp, send it away to different labs, and they would come back to us with the information from that. So it's something that we're gonna have to deal with it, but it's gonna be difficult to control. Dairy farmers could not sell their milk. They was, milking their cows, but they would take their milk and dump it out in the fields. Good.
Thank you, Richard. Yeah, I mean, we're thinking about our forest trees and the challenges there, but now it's even our soil and where our trees are coming from. So there's no shortage of challenges that we have to face with Wabanaki Forest and trying to protect these forests and these trees. I think we have some questions to go through. And I really appreciate everybody's time and listening to us talk about Wabanaki Forest futures. I'm looking forward to some of the questions. Here's one for you, Chuck. Can you explain the process of buffering and what you mean by that?
Thanks for that question. Sometimes, we forget what our audience is. We're working on areas trying to improve that a little bit, but buffering is, more or less just trying to create a space around a tree, or in some cases, we do it on roads, we do it on streams, for various reasons, but ultimately we're just trying to kind of, leave space around a tree that's untouched, I guess. So there will be other trees around this tree. Does that make sense?
Yeah, there's lots of forestry terms that we throw out that doesn't register with people the same way it would register for someone in the forestry realm. So we get those questions a lot, and we're happy to answer those. There was a question about the green trap that was in the photo on the slideshow. That was a green funnel trap. That was actually on Micmac tribal lands, and those are for monitoring for emerald ash borer. So all the tribes participate in monitoring efforts for emerald ash borer and lots of other forest pests. And emerald ash borer in particular is one that we're really working hard to make sure we get the earliest detection for. You showed that emerald ash borer isn't the happiest thing to talk about. What is one of the happiest things to talk about? That's a good question.
Yeah. I wanted to bring some light to the situation, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think probably right now, I think our happiest thing to talk about is fish restoration, Atlantic salmon restoration in the Penobscot watershed. That's, I'm definitely a forester, but I don't know. I probably should have been in fisheries, I feel like. But.
What about you, Richard? What is something that's exciting to talk about, happy to talk about?
Well, the emerald ash borer is not fun to talk about, but the good thing about that is that all 4 tribes in the state of Maine, the Maine Forest Service, the U.S. Forest Service, and some other organizations are all working together to try to see how we can combat, that insect and to, preserve some of these trees that they're killing. The emerald ash borer, it'll find a tree that has a weakness to it, and like a dead limb or something like that. But it'll fly right around a healthy tree to get to an a brown ash tree that has some weakness. And once they get in that, then they just multiply. So it's a good thing that we're all working together to try to combat that.
Yeah, no, I've learned a lot from Richard, from all the other collaborators on the work with ash, and I've really learned a lot about my family and the connection to brown ash in particular. My family was in Nova Scotia, and my great-grandfather made baskets, and my great-grandmother. And then we made it to the county where we made potato baskets, and it was for work, right? You moved there to pick potatoes in the potato field, to make baskets. It was a way for my family to sustain themselves. Richard's family probably outcompeted my family in terms of making potato baskets. So my family moved south, and we set root in southern Maine selling fancy baskets. So really, my whole family story has been related to this tree. And so that's been really rewarding. I talk a lot about all these terrible outlooks on the future of ash because of emerald ash borer. But when I get to talk about that connection to my family, that's one of the happier things to talk about for sure. This is another good question. Are there success stories from other tribal conservation efforts that inspire your work? I'll go first. One thing that I learned about early on, actually at school, but it was one of the few webinars that we had that had a tribal component, was the Salish and Kootenai tribe on the Flathead Lake Reservation in Montana. They are really trying to protect the white bark pine. And that's a higher elevation pine species that's being attacked by white pine blister rust, another invasive disease to our forests. And it wasn't something that interacted with it until climate change brought it into those higher elevation forests. But they're working really hard to do a very similar thing to try and protect that tree by collecting the seeds of the cones from the white bark pine. And they have this really cool, they have this crew of tribal cone collectors, and they all know how to climb like an arborist up into the tops of these white bark pine. And they put these cages around the cones so that they release, and then they climb back up and grab those cages, bring them down. They have a nursery that they propagate them. And it's just really inspiring to see what a value they place on that tree and some of the things they're doing. Lots of crossover and probably hopeful things for us in terms of protecting brown ash. So that's something that's really inspired some of my work.
Yeah, one of the good things about the tribes is the environmental programs that we have. We recently, got a big grant from EPA. Trump took that away for a few months, but we get it back. And I heard that the Passamaquoddy, it's Pleasant Point, got theirs back also. But they, so it's the money that we got in that grant. We're going to work on PFAS and the emerald ash borer and some of the other environmental issues that we have to deal with in northern Maine. And I'm sure that the other tribes all have an environmental program as well. And hopefully, at some point we can all get together and work together for the common good of the Wabanaki people.
I would say other, success stories that I've read of, kind of reintroducing species that were definitely historically present in areas. One thing comes to mind was, we had an article that in Sierra Magazine. It was kind of a picture article, and they did with the Penobscots and Atlantic salmon. And then in that article, I was reading, that there was some, I believe it was Fond du Lac out in Minnesota, had wolf introductions. And, it was really neat to see some of their work. Also, there was a tribe in Northern California that had California condor introductions as well. So, things like that just kind of inspire that fire within us, I feel like, to keep going. And, like Richard said, we're all pretty successful with writing some compelling grants and having some compelling stories to tell. So, I love reading, when other people are getting these big grants too. It's pretty impressive.
Let's see. Here's a question: how do you inoculate mother trees against the invasive emerald ash borer? It's a chemical treatment that we do on ash trees once emerald ash borer is at the site or it's getting very close to the site. And we particularly choose mother trees. So ash trees are male, female, or polygamous. And the female trees, of course, are the ones that produce the seed. And that's what we're so hopeful of collecting for genetic studies to see if there's some resistance to emerald ash borer, propagating that ash seeds, that we have seedlings that we can outplant into the forest, kind of get a good grasp of what that looks like on a larger scale. And so to protect them, we use this injected chemical insecticide that gets, you drill a hole for every inch in diameter of the tree at the base by the root flares, and it injects this chemical with this specific equipment that's really expensive. You also have to have the certification. And then the chemical itself is bioengineered, so it's very expensive. It's costly, but we see the value of protecting those mother trees for the future of the forest as something that outweighs that cost. We also try to prioritize mother trees that aren't basket quality so that we're not taking away a basket tree from a basket maker, although a lot of times basket makers are avoiding the mother trees because of the presence of seed anyway. So it's kind of a dynamic thing, but it's something that we haven't done on tribal land, but we're looking to get a good game plan for how to kind of bring that into the story of what we're doing to respond to emerald ash borer. Anything you want to add on protecting trees with chemical treatment?
Yeah, they injecting the soil, where that will get into the small part of the roots, and supposed to help keep that tree alive. There's the other process that Tyler mentioned was drilling holes around the tree and injecting the chemical in that. You have to have 7 holes around a tree so big. And but my concern about that is that chemical is going to be, into that tree, even if it was a good basket tree. When you cut that, is that chemical still going to be still into that wood? And what would it do to, a fancy basket maker who sometimes will run that splint, through their mouth to dampen it, instead of dipping it in water. So, there's a fear there. we sprayed some trees up north, brown ash trees, and around our farm, and that spray, although we mixed it with water, it cost $400 a gallon. You know, and you mix that with, I think, 25% of the chemical, 75% water. So, you know, and when we went out there in the woods and we sprayed, I don't know, 8 or 10 trees, you know, a gallon didn't go too far. You know, so, but we're always trying to move forward on this, and always trying to find a new way to combat this insect. You know, and hopefully eventually we'll find something that works.
Thank you so much, Richard. Please join me in a round of applause for Tyler, Chuck, and Richard. We certainly appreciate your time and your knowledge around the topic.